Hello everyone, I'm Tom Sawilla and my advocacy project is on the Ojibwe Bands challenging the 2021 Wisconsin gray wolf hunts, and this map just shows the Ojibwe Bands in Wisconsin that challenge this hunt in gray. So that's the Bad River Band, the Lac du Flambeau, Lac Courtourielis, St. Croix, Fond du Lac, and Segogan Mole Lake bands. So the problem this advocacy project addresses is whether the Wisconsin DNR violated Ojibwe treaty rights by allowing the fall 2021 gray wolf hunt and setting that hunt's quota incredibly high at around 300 wolves. Before getting into those treaty rights, a bit of background. There are 6 federally recognized Ojibwe bands in Wisconsin, which the bands are a subsect of the larger Ojibwe Nation, also known as Chippewa or Anishinaabe, and they filed for an injunction in September of 2021 before the November 2021 hunt was to go into effect. And the wolf has really high spiritual and cultural significance for the Ojibwe. The Ojibwe people believe that the wolf is a part of their creation story and that humans and wolves were put on the earth initially to walk side by side with each other, and whatever would happen to the wolf would eventually happen to man. And this hunt was possible because on the federal level, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service removed the wolf from its endangered status on the Endangered Species Act in October 29 of 2020. So there actually were a previous hunt and 218 wolves were killed a year ago, and that was 99 above the quota. So people exceeded that, and it caused a huge stir in Wisconsin. But the main issues addressed in this presentation will be those treaty rights interpretations, the reserved rights doctrine, the Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and federal and state trust responsibilities to the Ojibwe bands in Wisconsin. So there are 3 treaties here at issue that the Ojibwe Nation entered into with the federal government in 1825, 1837, and 1842. The first traded lands to the U.S. government in return for the Ojibwe to be able to hunt on those lands in perpetuity. The next traded timber rights in this green area on the map that's labeled 1837, and in return the Ojibwe retained the right to hunt, fish, and gather on these lands in perpetuity again. And then 1842, you can see kind of in the tan here, that ceded numerous mineral rights along Lake Superior to the U.S. government, again in return for the guarantee that the Ojibwe Nation can hunt, fish, and gather on these lands. So this implicates the treaty interpretation canons, specifically the hunting rights, and the courts found that these treaty rights were never abrogated, so they're still in effect, and that allows the Ojibwe tribe to hunt, fish, and gather anything they need to provide a moderate living to survive. And a lot of that implicates deer and wolves, because wolves kind of make sure the deer herd is safe. It prevents against chronic wasting disease, which we'll get into later. So that's kind of forms the basis for the tribe's claims against the Wisconsin DNR. And all of this, the right to, continue to hunt and fish on these lands is known as the reserved rights doctrine. And that was affirmed in a case I'll talk about in the next slide, where all half of harvestable resources in the state in these ceded territories need to be retained and apportioned equally between the tribes and non-Indians. So the regulatory framework at issue is mainly the Endangered Species Act, because the gray wolves were delisted by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So now management goes to the state, and Wisconsin chose to implement a hunt. But the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, their emblems here at the top, that decision is being challenged, and I'll talk about the decision on that in the next slide. But that also implements the National Environmental Policy Act, because the tribes and environmental groups challenging the delisting decision are saying that this did not abide by the best available science, because gray wolf populations are too low, they still need to be protected, and if there are hunts, it could exterminate the entire population in some states. And there also is helpful case law for the Ojibwe bands, because the reserved rights doctrine was previously affirmed on the treaties at issue, and it applied to deer hunting, saying all deer need to be apportioned equally between the Ojibwe and non-Native American citizens. And there also is a trust responsibility that the DNR has to hold wild animals and birds in the trust for the benefit of all state citizens, including Native Americans. So, a federal judge refused to issue the injunction because a previous case had already issued it, stopping the wolf hunt, and Earthjustice then partnered with the Ojibwe Bands to file an amended complaint because this injunction could be lifted any time. Luckily, however, the federal gray wolf delisting rule was vacated on February 10th, 2022, so gray wolf protections are back on the federal level and no hunt can go forward. Still, this case has a lot of lessons other tribes can use, specifically tying their treaty rights to protecting endangered species at the state level, but a lot of that derives from Wisconsin's beneficial case law, the reserved rights doctrine, and the tribe's advocacy at the federal and state levels.